You're listening to another Ambitious Entrepreneur Network.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
Welcome to Business Women Australia podcast, the podcast for ambitious women who are serious about business success and leadership development, keen to increase their knowledge and skills.
And welcome to another episode of Business Women Australia podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross, brand and podcast strategist. Now, my guest today says leaders create leaders. We need to understand and develop Generation Y and Z, as they will make up 70% of the workplace by 2030. And joining me on today's show is Jessica Schubert. Now, originally from Germany, Jessica has lived and worked in the corporate services industry all around the Asia Pacific. Now, 7 years ago, Jessica started her own leadership coaching practice to help people and businesses maximize their potential. Now, she helps leaders have better conversations with themselves and with others so that they can create workplaces where people are happy and they're productive. Now, one of Jessica's specialties is multi-generational leadership, helping leaders to temperature check their work culture and put steps in place to close the generational gap. Now, on today's show, Jessica is going to share generational shift, what has changed, and how does it impact our workplace culture. She's also going to talk about communicate with your growing workforce of younger generations and get them involved to change your workplace culture, as well as how to temperature check your multi-gen workplace culture as well. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Anne-Marie. Very excited.
Very, very excited. I mean, we are living in a very different world, a very different place. I'm sure you have had many conversations with businesses, your clients all around the world, who are not only dealing with multi-gen cultures, but now how are we going to manage this online? So I know this is going to be a real rich topic. Before we dive in, what was it that led you to really starting to want to specialize in this particular area? Was it something you'd always have an interest in, or something that you found yourself helping businesses with? What was your story?
Anne-Marie, it probably came more from my clients because I listen to what my clients need more of, but also where their challenges lie. And one question that my clients, are coming back with constantly is, you've probably heard this before, millennials are so entitled, they don't have the same work ethic as us. What are we going to do with them? And through, those sort of comments and that content and context, I've started to do a lot of, research around it, but also develop, workshops and coaching sessions to really help solve that problem. Because in the beginning, 6 years ago, I didn't know what that was. I just saw, team dynamics that didn't work, certainly clashes between sort of the older and the younger generations. And I said, look, I'm going to do some work here, and I do research so I can facilitate in the best way how to put out all the stops. And you have to start with awareness. You have to know, the content and context and have that research and then develop from there.
Yeah, love that. And, it's interesting because I'm sure, we're now talking about, Generation Y, Generation Z. And I'm sure when you go back 10 years, maybe even 20 years, the older generation back then was probably talking about Gen X, saying these Gen Xers coming into the workplace. So it's interesting. I think one of the greatest things that we can do, as you said, is really gaining an awareness, because I think everybody has unique styles and unique approaches that they can bring to the workforce. And if we're trying, to that saying, fit a square peg into a round hole, or vice versa, it really doesn't work. Now, let's talk about some of the generational shifts. You say that what's changed, talking about that, but how does it impact our workplace culture? What are some things you're finding?
So the first thing, I want to sort of go back to what you said before. There've been generations, before, and actually the oldest ones we talk about at the moment are the traditionalists. They're 72 years and older. They're not in the workforce anymore, but they were 10, 20 years ago. And here's the thing with generational differences. Differences are felt by every generation. Yeah, it's not a one-way street. It's not that it's always the younger generations. It's also the other way around. So when we say, as baby boomers and X's, we talk about Generation Y, which are millennials, and Generation Z, which is the younger generation that's coming into the workforce now, that we think, some of their behavior, is perceived as being entitled or not hardworking. It goes the other way around, where they perceive us in a certain way. From them, you would probably hear things like, why are you printing so much paper? What's with all the rigidity? It's too rigid in the way you work. Why would you say we've always done stuff like that? This is how we do things around here. Where's the flexibility? So they see us as overly rigid and, using traditions and the way we work, often in a complicated way. They think we can't use technology in the way they do, right? Yeah. So we have to be mindful of, the fact that differences are felt by every generation. And here's the thing, the biggest gap is when there is a generation in between. So we're looking at baby boomers, for example, who are between 50 and 70 years old. There are still some of those are in our workforce. Generation X, between 40 and 55. Millennials, or Generation Y, it's the same generation, between 26 and 40. And Generation Z, our youngest entrants, our graduates right now, are between 11 and 25. So when there's a generation in between is when you have the biggest gap. So baby boomers really struggle with Generation Y, with millennials. With we as Generation X, as Anne-Marie, you and I, we sort of get them. They're the next generation down, but we struggle with Generation Z, our graduates in their early 20s, mid-20s when they come into the workforce. But here's the thing, that generation over are actually our children. We've brought these...
So blame ourselves.
Kids up, that's right. And I say this to, especially when I have presentations about multi-general leadership, I say this to the sort of back of the room, baby boomers, you brought these kids up and they're in the workforce now, and their behavior displays that. Because, and again, something sort of more general to shine a light on what, the generational problems are. It's felt by everyone, but it's also, there's a big misperception. And I had that misperception as well when I started this work, that we think, it's sort of a bit of a, what would you say? It's a bit of a fad, we'll recruit them, and then they'll grow out of it because we show them how things are done around here. And behaviors of different generations are not a fad. It's not a pendulum. They don't grow out of it because our behaviors are very connected to our values, and values is something we grow up with, So think about how you brought up your own children. They bring those values and how they've been brought up into the workplace, It's much, much deeper anchored than just, well, this is how we work around here. So basically, generations are a product of, of the events, their own leaders, their development, their upbringing, their parents and their culture and their country they live in, and the trends of their time. And history and trends of their time is something called social markers. And I think it's really important to talk about that for a minute, because we're talking about what impact do generations and their behaviors have on the workplace. It's important to understand where that comes from. So when you look at, for example, at some of the social markers of baby boomers, they grew up in times of, where they had the first TVs, so it was a little bit more globalized, rock and roll, but also the Cold War. So they've been brought up with, their parents who actually went through the war, and then there was the Cold War. Generation X, people like you and I, we grew up with the first-person computers and having a personal computer in your household, certainly at work. But we also the first generation to truly been brought up in single-parent families. So your social demographic world that you grew up in also has a lot to do with how independent you work. So look at how Generation X is much more independent than baby boomers and traditionalists were at work. Absolutely impacts leadership style, right? Whereas Generation Y, our millennials, internet, cable TV, globalization, zipping around the work and doing internships, and environmentalism. We haven't been brought up in that way, and we look to in the environment very different than the younger generations. And the Generation Z, 10 to 24, they're born into the digital world. We call them digital natives. And the big events for them, certainly GFC and now COVID. and they are impacted by COVID, that's going to be their social marker when they go into leadership. They're shaped by that, by the angst, fear, anxiety, but also the opportunity to shift things around and work in the new normal, and use technology really well to connect really well and lead well in this world. They will show us the way in this. So we have to understand that the way we grow up and our social markers actually inform us and make us who we are in our generation. Now, I don't want to put anyone into a sort of a square or a corner. This is a generalization of what we see in the world. Of course, there's a lot more at play. But if in organizations or as individuals, even in families, we understand where behavior comes from, it's really from our past and how we've grown up and in the environment and what happened around us.
Brilliant. And it's so true what you're saying. And so often what they when I say individuals do in a workplace is they don't recognize that. And as you said, they assume that people are going to change. But if it's been brought up and it's just who they are, then pushing back is just going to continue to cause conflict. Let's talk about then, okay, we recognize that we need to recognize that there's differences in our approach, but communication, I know, is one of the biggest reasons why people struggle. They're communicating with one another, but they're not understanding one another. So I know you're going to share today about how we can communicate with this growing workforce of younger generations and help kind of get them to embrace and involved in changing workplace culture. What are some things?
Absolutely. Yeah, so communication is a big one. And when you look at, are you still there, Anne-Marie? Oh, yeah, there you are. Sorry.
We can see you.
When we look at the way, baby boomers, communicate in a proper way, writing letters, just about to, used to writing emails. And communication has changed in a way that, there's a very natural use of social media and technology, but it's also, it's more in, it's evolving back into symbols. So when you think of hieroglyphs 40,000 years ago, and you've got all the hieroglyphs in Egypt, now you look at a whole range of emoticons. And when I do webinars or I'm in the room, I can actually make that visual what it looks like. We sort of have gone back to using really short message and sort of almost coding and emoticons to be able to express what we want to say. And I do think it comes partly from that we don't have time anymore. Technology has made us to react much quicker as well. And again, that's making us and in younger generations to just on a language level, to be, short, descriptive, and, be sort of that little bit hip about it as well. Now, I'm not saying that every organization has to change, but when I think of, how you would recruit, onboard, and give feedback, when I see organizations do that really well, is that they start to adapt to that. So just think about you recruit, you try to attract younger generations, having a long job description on an online job platform and, requesting a formal resume is probably not what really works for younger generations, especially Generation Y. So think about how they communicate. Do you know what the biggest search engine of Generation Y, and the new one is actually Generation Alpha, that's 10 years and younger. Do you know their biggest search engine? It's not Google.
Yeah.
It's YouTube. YouTube is their biggest search engine. So we're changing in terms of communication to shorter, but also using video really well. So I see organizations putting out job ads where, it is through a video, asking for a video, and therefore finding out what are your values, what do you think you fit of the, for the job, why would you want to work for us, give us a video and, and a short narrative, so it works for them. Because the old way doesn't get the response you want. So I'm just talking about recruiting and onboarding, but you can feed that through the whole of the organization. Why do we expect the younger generation to do everything exactly the way we do in formal communication, emails, and having folders and working our way? So it's about understanding, how do you work? How do I get the best out of you? Because when you look at those numbers, Anne-Marie, you know, the over 70% of our workforce is going to be generation Y and Z.
Yeah.
In That's exactly right. So they're our leaders. So our job now is to develop them as leaders so they can lead, you know, in a way that, you know, our businesses still grow and, you know, the world is a happier place.
Yeah.
But we have to understand how they learn.
It's so interesting. I mean, even if I think of, because I've got children who are early 20s, mid-20s actually to late 20s, and even in just how we communicate, you know, my husband will say, well, can you contact them or let them know? And what are you doing? I said, I'm going to message them on Facebook. Don't message them, ring them. And it's like, ring them? Why would I ring them? Who rings these days? Message on Facebook, done and dusted, you know, that kind of thing. And so what's interesting thing, and one of the points that you mentioned is it's so important to understand and have different ways of communication, isn't there? Different ways that allows them to tap into the best, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how they're communicating, but that the message is understood and the things that you want them to work on is completed. Something else that I'd love you to share a little bit on as well is this whole topic of you have to start at 9 and finish at 5 or whatever. That's probably something that's quite different now too with the younger generation, because a lot of them tend maybe not to start early, but later on in the day, and then towards the evening work quite late at night. Different, again, best times that they operate. Talk a little bit about that if you've got some insights.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that comes from my research, but I can also tell you a story, you know, about a company who does that really well. And it is a process, but, you know, it's work-life integration, but also seeing work as your third place. The sort of intermingling of work and your life, you know, sort of your values, is very fluent for younger generations. And they do not understand the concept of you work hard from 9 to 5 and you definitely, you know, do overtime as well and is paid and remunerated in a certain way. It is different to them. For them, it's more, it's the output and it's the purpose. Now, again, it goes both ways. That doesn't mean that as senior leaders, we now let them go out and off and just do their own thing. They have to be clear about, you know, expectations, you know, their delivery and, you know, what they have to do and what they have to bring to the company, of course. That hasn't changed, but it's different in a way, you know, how we communicate that. And shifting to a more work-life integration definitely requires flexibility. That actually plays really well within the context of the world that we're in today, because they work well remotely, or that they want that connection. So, you know, they're still, people now want to go back to work and they do as well. But that flexibility of when they work has definitely changed. I'll give you an example. So it's just a little bit more practical. I work with a client in Prague. It's a team of 70 people, and they design and deliver study programs to business school students all around the world. It's quite a young and even more now young workforce than it was ever before. And what the organization realized is there was a bit of a turnover and there was a big clash in communication between the senior leadership, who was Generation X and had been there for most of this time. The senior leaders all been there for 20 years, and the younger workforce, and it just didn't work. So what the leadership team did was actually have proper, constructive, collaborative conversations. Started with an employee engagement survey, taking that survey further and have roundtable discussion in project groups to find out what they needed. And what the younger generation said was, we want more flexibility. We want to be able to work from home because we travel so much with these student groups that I can't, you know, fathom to come from a plane off, go into the office and, you know, have that restriction. I also, you know, I need a bit of, you know, my life and work from home. Yeah. So we would like to work on a basis of, you know, reaching goals and targets and being measured by that rather than being in the office. So that was one thing. And they really did this where within 2 years, you could work from home as many hours as you wanted, as long as you hit your KPIs. But the KPIs look different from KPIs now because it's about delivery, but it's also about you check in and how well you manage and lead your own teams. And the other things they also wanted are, being able to contribute in a purposeful way. So they're like, we want to give back. We don't work with charities. So then it was employee-led 3 project with 3 charities that most of the people now work for and work with. And they wanted access to the leadership team. So there's Ask Me Anything, open conversations and town halls all the time as well. So it actually changed from a quite hierarchical, sort of structure in the organization to a much broader structure where it was more about project teams, flexible working hours. Of course, what had to be delivered and the financial and commercial outcome of the business hadn't changed. It was just delivered and asked for in a different way. So there are certain interventions, and it took about 2 years to get there, and it's an ever evolving, of course, process. But it's probably one of the companies where I have seen where they did that really, really well.
Yeah. What's really interesting is the feedback that they got from the younger generation saying we would love to be able to tap in to the senior leadership. And what that often shows is how often senior leadership, they may think that they're sharing, content information, but actually not. How does that look? Just out of interest, I'm curious. Is that structured, or is there a way that the younger generation can ask certain questions that's gathered, and then the senior leadership team is then how is that facilitated?
So the Ask Me Anything meetings are open because it is literally Ask Me Anything. Now, I must underline and stress, you're not able to do and facilitate these open sessions if there's no trust to start off with. So if as an organization or as a leader, you think that's a great idea, I'm going to do that with my team or my organization, you really have to work with, your leadership team and your team coach on, do we have the right platform? Because for your wider organization and your teams to have the trust to ask everything, you got to build the trust. So what this company has always done really well is being absolutely transparent about everything. Here's our company structure. Here's how much money we make. And I know that's not always possible, especially when you're publicly listed or, it's a bit more complex, but your work starts, of course, on the cultural basis of, building trust. So there can be, and you have to be transparent. So the younger generations are ready to ask the tough questions. Then as a leadership team, you have to be able to answer them. And then you're going to have to hold the room and do something with that. So if there are tough questions of why are we still working in these structures? We really want more flexible hours. What are you going to do with that? That you take that on board, build project groups and get them to come up with solutions to start off with. All the research I've read, Anne-Marie, really shows that, if you want to make a change for younger generations, get them involved and ask them how they would run it. That doesn't mean you answer to their every whim. So, who wants change? Everyone goes, yes. Who wants to lead the change? No one, no one raises their hand. So get them involved. But you have to start with trust building first before you can do a very open Ask Me Anything. You have to do them regularly, transparently, and then use the outcome and whatever came up to do something with that as well and get them involved. So you get that buy-in from them. And then, of course, you can do roundtable discussions. You have project groups and so on and so forth. So that's what that would look like.
And I, as you've stressed, and I know that this is going to be relevant for everyone. Every organisation is going to be different. There might be some key strategies or frameworks that you use, but at what timing that you implement them depends on the foundations that you've built. But what's really interesting about that, and which is why I asked that question, is that even from both sides, both parties, the older and then the younger generation, it's not until we often walked in someone's shoes that we can appreciate more fully some of the parameters that has led to the discussion. So I would imagine that with some of the leadership team having that transparency on some of the reasons why they're doing things, because they're not keeping things behind, locked behind the door of just the boardroom of the senior leadership. The younger generation can see, oh, is that why? Isn't it always the case? If we know why and we can see and we're kind of getting buy-in to the bigger picture, everyone can then work together and vice versa. So I really love, that kind of open and contributing culture, because you just don't know. Someone may come up with an idea and they start brainstorming it because it's encouraged of them. You can come up with a solution to something that you would never have come up with, were it not for the appreciation of people being able to be openly discuss things and come up with these ideas. Now, for a company to think, okay, where are we at on a scale from not doing really well to doing really well, like this company in Prague, what are some things that organizations can do to start to temperature check their multi-gen workplace culture? What are some things that you could advise?
Yeah. So in a minute, I want to talk about a tool, a diagnostic I'm developing. So it's actually easier for companies to do that first temperature check where, you do an assessment, you answer some questions to see where you're at in, different areas. And I'll shine a light on that as well. But it starts with really looking at, your main areas. Yeah. And workplace culture, for example, social connection and belonging, is the first part you need to look at. And, that work-life integration, that communication piece. Because it's interesting, the main conversations then I have, with the decision makers in organizations, and they're the ones who come to me, through, talking to me and doing their own research. It's exactly what they say. They're like, Jess, we actually have no idea, because we don't actually talk to the younger generations because of that misperception of they're coming in with a set of behaviors and we're going to make sure we change that through our pendulum and how things are done here. We don't actually really know, right? Our job as leaders is to create new leaders. Yeah, we have to prepare those two generations to be able to lead businesses in a sustainable and successful way. Yeah, so they run profitably and for purpose. For purpose is actually more important for younger generations, and therefore we have to find out what are their fears and what are their motivators, and it's all about having that two-way conversation. And you can do that through, Ask Me Anything projects, but simply putting channels of communication in place where that's done in a meaningful way. I know so many companies who don't even have town halls anymore, where you have the opportunity to explain your why, or it's the buck stops them with the team leaders. It's not even part of their KPIs to have those conversations, or very easily use your social media channels. Yeah, that works. Again, that works really well. How are you doing in your communication department? Yeah, when it comes to output in terms of videos and language that sits with younger generations. Are you using Yammer or are you still on email? Most of the modern organizations I work with are moving away from email. Yeah, they're using Microsoft Teams, they're using Yammer, they're using other forms of technology to interact and communicate with each other. Now, where it's much more what do you say? Well, it's much better. So, what's the word? Successful. Yes.
Kind of, it's all streamlined and succinct in that kind of one area. If you have Slack, the communications are going on. I mean, if I have a look at what my son is doing, I mean, he's 26 and he's got 3 computer screens because he's at home at the moment because they're all kind of, working from home. 3 screens, 20 different conversations going on, and my head just spins. But these youngsters can do that, can't they? They can do that really well. So if you talk about productivity, they could probably do something in 5 minutes that would talk with the technology at their fingertips that might take us, maybe an hour or so it's interesting, a lot of those tools. And, it's one of those things, I think, if you allow them to communicate in a way that they communicate best, you're then able to provide an environment where they can show up and be their best and not try. It's almost like getting us to use a piece of technology that we may require a little bit more time to use. And so fascinating. Conversation. So what are you finding then once people have gone through a bit of a temperature check, and then again getting people to contribute, getting these younger generations to contribute around roundtables on how they would like to see which tools are best adopted, what they would prefer, again getting them to participate in the conversation as you're starting to roll out some changes, rather than the senior leadership team making that decision again for them. Right, we're doing this now. That would work better, wouldn't it? Collaborative conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. So the conversations start to be more collaborative. But what you see as well is, and what you find in, when you look at international study programs, your outcome as an organization is productivity, retention, having a good purpose, but making a profit at the same time. Yeah. So, purpose before profit. And you obviously measure your own organizational goals along these parameters. What you find is that the vehicles and the interventions that you use through your people work much better. And first of all, you have to create the awareness, of, what does it all entail? Where are the different, areas of, technology innovation, skill alignment, work-life integration, training and development, community and communication. And this is where the temperature, check and my diagnostic tool will sit, to be able to then work together in a collaborative way of coming up with structures, processes, and even products. Yeah, because you should also ask them, what do our clients think? Has that changed? Yeah, your clients, either grow with you or they grow out of you, and you have new clients, right? So, tap into your younger generations to get that knowledge. Why do we leave innovation to an innovations department, or the chief technological officer, where you have people sitting there who know what is there in terms of innovation? They can work on that. Hackathons are the last biggest thing to, use, and develop that skill to be able to innovate, and design as well. Then the next step is, what do you do with that? So temperature check first, and then of course break into, projects and plans on what do you want to work, towards, next. I think it's also a little bit, again, you can't put everything and everyone in the same box, because everyone, or in a box, because every organization or every team would discover, different levels of then the temperature check. But it's also important to keep the organizational goal in check. How does it align with the organizational goal? But if the organizational goal is, for example, to have higher retention and staff engagement, and, in your temperature check, what you notice is that, say training and development and recruitment, it doesn't align with that. So then go deeper and find out what it is, and understand that, younger generations, Generation Z will probably have about, I think it's 16 careers. It's 18 jobs in 6 careers. Again, it's generalized, and Deloitte actually says we don't see that. But, that also accounts for having, opportunities within the organization. And with that, change your position, or even change a whole department. So as organizations, we have to be really flexible, and remember that younger generations, again, marked through their social markers of having probably been retrenched already a couple of times. Yeah, GFC has happened. Now in COVID, the younger generations are the ones who lose their jobs. So they're used to that, and they go into a job with that attitude that they know, I could be retrenched, but I also could go because I'm looking for new opportunities. Yeah. What that means for an organization is, don't get upset about it, but maximize your recruitment and your onboarding and your training process. Yeah. Young generations say, don't tell me what I already know, train me what I need to do the job. Yeah. So again, using your onboarding with videos, things to read up, giving good resources, but then train them in a way so they can add value to the organization, rather than, just doing a job. This attitude and approach is so different from how we learned, Anne-Marie, right? And we have to understand that as organization. Again, like, it's not the same with every individual and every organization, but the trend for people to come and go is big. So therefore, you have to look at all your channels of communication when you recruit, onboard, and train. And training and development, there is a much bigger focus on soft skills rather than your technical skills. Yeah. There needs to be that training, but they are asking for soft skills.
So important. And I think if we look at what's happening in the world today, I mean, I know that so many organizations now are having to revisit, just everything that has to do with in their workplace and how they do business. And I think that will continue on. And so the best people that you could get on your team are the ones who are flexible, who are able to not only embrace innovation and change, but who are also able to contribute to it. So from an organizational point of view, we need to be innovative in all sorts of areas, because so many of our customers, key stakeholders from a global scale have changed, have needed to change. And I think moving forward, we can get the best from everybody of all generations working in our organization, so that we can shift and change a lot quicker. I mean, I know for a lot of the smaller businesses are probably set, isn't it? Because that's kind of they're able to move a lot quicker, whereas you've got these large organizations that have meetings after meetings after meetings to have a meeting. That makes sense, to come up with a change or something like that. So look, I know we've only just scratched the surface, but it's certainly been an interesting conversation. So if people were listening today, Jessica, or maybe even watching or listening to the replay, and they'd love to know a little bit more about you, how best should they reach out?
They should reach out by emailing me on, and I'm sure it's in the show notes as well, jessica@intactteams.com, and just have a conversation with me about if it's in particular to multi-gen. My diagnostic tool to temperature check is going to be ready in about a month or so. I'm just developing it right now. But I also help with, just consulting companies. But my work really lies in working with leaders, individuals, coaching teams, and groups and organizations to put out all the stops and create communication channels, being able to develop in a way that they are able to influence and innovate in the best way they can, and that's really where my work is.
Yeah, fantastic, Jessica. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And of course, this is part of Business Women Australia. And if you've been listening or watching and you are a woman who is in business, maybe your own business, or you're part of a leadership team and you are living in Australia and you want to find out more about business women, all you need to do is go to businesswomenaustralia.com.au.